Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
This entire military is one cohesive, dedicated force. And the threats to our nations, they don't sleep. They're watching our every move. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. They may be watching this right now. Our military should not be mistaken for a cable news gabfest show. We don't care what you look like. We don't care who you voted for, who you worship, what you worship, who you love. It doesn't matter if your dad left you millions when he died or if you knew who your father was. We have been honed into a machine of lethal moving parts that you would be wise to avoid if you know what's good for you. We will not be intimidated. We will not back down. We've seen war. We don't want war. But if you want war with the United States of America, there's one thing I can promise you, so help me God. Someone else will raise your sons and daughters.
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Join Terry with Tracer Rounds every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern to hear interviews with veteran artists, veteran business owners, and businesses that support veterans. Catch us on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and MB Radio. If you miss a show, you can listen again on Wreaths Across America Radio every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Tune in to see if you are on target. MBR, giving veterans a voice.
And welcome to the Tracer Rounds podcast. And I'm Terry, your host. And with me tonight is Jenny. And Jenny is with, I think your mic is muted if you want to unmute it. There we go. Is with Pacific Atrocities Education, and it's out of California. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you because I was kind of looking through the information that's on your website, and I'll put that at the bottom of the screen too so people can check that out. But I was hearing some of the stories that I was really surprised to hear. And there's a lot of untold stories, as you mentioned, that a lot of us don't know about. So how did you get started in writing these stories or in developing this education center?
Yeah, so my grandma, when I was a kid, my grandma hated the Japanese. Like whenever I watched Japanese cartoon or anime, she would tell me about how much she had suffered when she was younger because of the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong. And so I thought that she had just been racist for no reason. And little did I realize that what she was telling me was true. And it was very fascinating because I never learned about it in school. And so then then I started reading books like, Flags of Our Fathers by James Bradley, and also Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang, and also The Death Factory by Sheldon Harris. And it was all very interesting to me because it's like a whole chapter of history that kind of get left out. Like in school, we learned about Pearl Harbor. Right. I think we, when I was going to public school in California, we watched one movie on Pearl Harbor, and that was it. And our like World War II education in terms of like United States versus Japan. And I didn't realize that like there were so many things, so many episodes that had happened between just that like 4 years of war. And right after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, like in 8 hours, they attacked Hong Kong and Southeast Asia as well. and then the Canadians also sent troops to Hong Kong to fight, and that was all very interesting to me. Um, but I study economics and stats, and after college I had like a normal job, and but it was just so interesting. And I think at the same time I also saw on the news that Dianne Feinstein was releasing declassified documents about the Pacific War, and also what had happened in Asia. And so then I decided that maybe there's like an organization that I can go help support or work for that is scanning and digitizing and doing more research. Maybe it can be a data analyst at this center. That did not exist. And so after studying so much about like what had happened in the war, I decided, well, why don't I start an organization to actually research, because there are so many Holocaust remembrance center about and what had happened in the East. I mean, in Europe. So what had happened in the East affected so many Americans, like 400,000 Americans died during the Pacific War. So I thought, well, that should be something that should that maybe I can start and study. And I was very naive. I thought that like going to the National Archive meant that like they had already digitized all the items and everything's going to be neatly in the box, and all I need to do is to be like, oh, let me request certain subject and they'll give it to me. But little did I realize that all of them are like kind of organized in a crazy way. So then like if you're looking for the OSS document, you might come across something that might be interesting and related to like what you're looking for, like 3 trips ago. And so so then this started like so this little adventure started 10 years ago, and I'm still scanning documents from the National Archives. We have an associate that scan documents from the National Archives, and we're still like uncovering like new tidbits about what had happened in World War II. And like, so it's very interesting because it goes in full circle, because recently I reached out to James Bradley. I might be one of the only people who read like 5 of his books, and I started out reading like Flags of His Fathers, and then like the Imperial Cruise, and also Flyboys. And what was interesting in Flyboys is that apparently George Bush was captured, the older Bush was captured by Japanese uh his crew of like, he was a pilot in World War II, and so he had the other 8 airmen were captured and eaten by the Japanese Imperial Army. And George Bush was the only one who escaped. So history could have been changed had that been like, had that little incident been changed. And so these are like some very fascinating stories that I think really affect America, but we don't really talk about in terms of like history lessons. And so that's things that we cover. And now James Bradley does our podcast twice a month on Pacific Front Untold, and he's such a good like historian. And he even went to Chichijima with George Bush like a few years, I mean, I think it must have been 10 years ago, at least, just to see like that Chichijima incident, and how that story how he even broke that story was interesting, because he told me in the podcast that apparently Iris Chang had called him and told him to call this guy because it was too crazy. Iris Chang is was a best-selling author of The Rape of Nanking, and she had called him. She had emailed him to call this guy who she said was too crazy for her, and then he just arrived like the next day, and he was saying, "Oh, I was at this secret war crimes trial, and and the secret war crime trials so happened to be Chichijima incident, where the airmen were captured, and cannibalized. And so I mean, it's such fascinating story. And lately I started uncovering more and more of these wartime stories, which is just, to me, I think they all deserve a more prominent space, because as I dive into it, as we started doing more research, I realized that the Pacific War mattered more than what classrooms I think World War II is. And
Right.
it's way more prominent. It should be way more prominent because it affected so many lives. Like 30 million people died in Asia. And so all of those stories are very interesting. And yeah, so that's what we do. We research. We also have a podcast, and we also have Instagram and blog posts to make sure that, like, we really we really remember these stories of people suffering.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot more to to World War II as far as how the Japanese treated the other countries they invaded, and then their own people, for that matter, that we don't hear about or we haven't heard about. And I thought it was interesting that you said in something that I was reading or listening to that there was a lot of censure going on about World War II because they wanted to make sure that people weren't feeling defeated or feeling like there was something really bad happening, and they didn't want them to feel that way, so and I know there's some of that today still, but why do you think that there was such censure at that point where they didn't really want these stories told?
It's actually interesting, and that's very good. That's a very good question. So, in I recently am putting together an exhibition on the online archive, and what was very interesting to me is that a lot of the veterans actually suffered a lot during World War II. They were captured, for example, by the at Bataan Death March. Then they were sent in these hell ships, and then they were beaten, they were tortured, they were doing slave labor. And then they had all these forms. And but after the war, America really needed Japan to be an ally per se. And so it's very interesting to me too, for all of these, like, political moves, because in 1882 Chinese people were banned from the United States, and then right after Pearl Harbor, China is our number one ally. and,
Isn't that funny how
and
that works?
then and then if you think about it, and then right after World War II there was the Chinese Civil War. And so then the United States needed Japan to fight China, right? And so, for example, Eisenhower even took the war criminal, Class A war criminal, out of Sugamo prison. His name was Kishi Nobusuke, and then installed him into a prime minister of Japan in, like, within 10 years. And then I was reading all of these affidavits from these veterans who fought the war, and they were saying, like, they had suffered so much and torture and whatnot, but then afterward, I think it was in, like, late 1940s, they all signed an NDA saying that they won't talk about it anymore. And so then that's why and there's also in this book called Unjust Enrichment by Linda Holmes, that they promised to not talk about it anymore, about what they have done in slave labor camp to put Mitsubishi planes together in Mukden. So let me go back in my story. So after Bataan Death March, um, a bunch of veterans got captured, and then they went into house ships. And then these house ships basically were all packed in there without food, without water, and then they were sent to, like, various factories or mining sites that the Japanese Empire owned. And these Japanese in so one of the sites were actually in northeast China, in Manchuria, which Japan had captured since 1931. And they were producing airplanes. And when Japan captured China, these Chinese villagers didn't really know how to put together airplanes in this Mitsubishi site, because I don't think the Chinese people were literate at this point. And so then they were like, all of the executives were very excited when the American veterans arrived, because they were thinking like, wow, we can finally have people who can read charts and put airplanes together.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and that's for the Mitsubishi Zero airplanes. And there was this diary that I found in the archives from Robert Peaty. And Robert Peaty was in from the UK, and he was also captured in this camp. And in his diary, he would write like something like, "Oh, today an American died. Today an American died. Today an American died." Like, the death rate for Americans were very staggering at this camp. And if you look up the stats, it was actually more likely for people to survive the concentration camp, and also for the Nazi POW camp, than to survive a Japanese forced labor camp.
Wow.
And so, because they were already so weak from the Bataan Death March, where they marched 65 kilometers to Camp O'Donnell, and to be shipped to Camp O'Donnell, and then they were shipped elsewhere, and they were already starving. And also northeast China at the time was very cold as well.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting, because as I was reading like these affidavits, there were people who were trying to like sabotage this Mitsubishi Zero airplane operation, because they were thinking like, these airplanes are going to hurt our people, so
Yeah.
why would we want to put these airplanes? And then they were then captured, and they were tortured if they were found trying to like um uh sabotage the assembling operation.
Right.
And it's very interesting too, because they were also, in my opinion, after I read all these documents, they were also subject to human experimentation, because Unit 731 was so close by. So then they would produce these vaccines, and they would inject it into these POWs, and
Mm.
would just be like, oh, maybe this is the way, this would cause this, and that would cure that and whatnot. And in Linda Holmes' book, she actually confirmed like my understanding that they were doing human experimentation in these camps. And what's also very interesting is that yeah, these are like things that we don't talk about as Americans, even though
Right.
that Americans has such an experience in the Pacific War. And I think that's what we focus on. That's the kind of stories that we focus on. So when we focus on like World War II, we focus on like the Pacific, where it's not just Asian people who were suffering, but like Americans were also suffering in in this moment when America was really fighting against some fascist power.
Yeah. I haven't heard a lot of that. I mean, I knew some of it, but I'm certainly no history aficionado at all. And so, I learn something every time I hear someone talk, especially, about some of the past wars. There's a lot I don't know. And so hearing some of these stories really does help get word out, and really does allow us to understand what happened, because I think if we don't talk about what happened, we're doomed to repeat some of these same things. If somebody isn't really giving us the whole story and really explaining what happened or how we got to where we are right now. Because I didn't realize that Japan had invaded other countries at the same time. We focus, like you say, we focus on Pearl Harbor. That was the major event for us, and so that's what we focus on. And then we focus on what happened afterward, but we don't really focus on, what else happened, and what else Japan was doing while they were doing this to us, while we were, at Pearl Harbor and thinking about that battle.
Yeah, and definitely, like, what is never again if the first time was never told? And that's when it was real. When I was reading Flyboys by James Bradley too, it was really staggering to me that no one really talked about this. And he was in, like, I think by the time he was writing that book, it was like 65 years since World War II.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of those family members had just thought that, their family died from another battle. They didn't really know what had happened to their family members. And so when he found out, the first thing he did, he picked up the phone and called a lot of these like affected families and just told them like, hey, this is probably what happened to your kid, or like, or to your to your boyfriend at the time. And yeah, it's
Wow.
just, and it's just like even the family didn't know that that was what happened to those pilots.
Yeah, I've never heard that, and I don't know if President Bush had ever mentioned that. Did he? I don't recall him ever talking
He
about that.
actually, yeah, I don't think so, but he actually went and visited Chichijima with James Bradley, and I think there were news articles out back then about that trip, but I don't think he like publicly talked about it. I found a memoir of Prince Konoe, who were like 3 times prime minister of Japan. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, he was also prime minister uh when that decision was made. And then I reached out to a guy who was the ambassador for George Bush when George Bush was president, and he told me that he had never heard about like Prince Konoe, nor the time that Chichijima nor the Chichijima incident. So even if people working in the government don't know, or who are working in the government don't know, then what do you expect other people, to know about these things?
Right. Yeah. It's amazing that someone didn't say what really happened. So in all your studies of the archives, I mean, how does that go? How do you start that research? Because I can't imagine, it must have been a very big task to start looking into all these documents and trying to put all the puzzle pieces together to connect the dots, as people often say, from this event to that event, and who was a part of, all of these different things. How did you start doing that? I mean, that seems like such a daunting task.
It really was. And like I have like a little piece of note that like I would like start writing timelines and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so then I can work out what had really happened. And it's the documents are organized in a way that it's so hard if you don't know what you're looking for. Even when you're looking even when you know what you're looking for, it was kind of hard for me.
Yeah.
So for example, Sheldon Harris had mentioned in the first edition of his book that they were probably using Americans, POWs, as human experimentations. But then on the second edition, he took that part out. And then it wasn't until I was at the National Archive that I realized that he took it out because he was facing pressure from the Congress. They held a hearing after the first edition of his book and said that you should probably take that out because you have no proof. And so I started being very interested. I was thinking like, then how come Linda Holmes wrote about this POW like human experimentation? So there must be documents related to this. And then I went ahead, and since Linda Holmes was writing about Mukden and Hoxton POW camp, I asked for the forced laborers of the Hoekton and Mukden camp to see if there were vaccine record or human experimentation record, and I found them. And then and then I also started looking more for OSS record as well, because OSS was like the predecessor of CIA,
Mhm.
and they had known a lot of intelligence, for example, about um about about all kinds of things. Um, for example, they even found they were the one who were reporting about how there were Japanese scientists who made it to the Rockefeller Institute to try to steal some strands of yellow fever virus, just so then
Oh,
they
wow.
can develop more biological weapons. And that's how they learned about this biological lab, Unit 731, in that was happening in Occupy China. And it was very interesting to me to like piece those pieces together.
Yeah.
And lately, we started researching more into like class B and class C war criminals. Just because they were like lower in the totem pole doesn't mean that it's not an interesting story.
Right.
And one of our interns, last summer, his father was in the Navy, and then we were looking through like all these Yokohama trial and whatnot. And it was interesting because we found out that there were pilots in that were trying to bomb Japan by 1945, and they were captured by these villagers and then sent to like college campus as human experimentations.
Oh, really?
And my intern told her father, who served in the military, and he was shocked. I mean, this is like something that we don't really hear about.
Yeah.
And he was this is words of his. He said that if we learn about, what Hitler was doing and also the Holocaust concentration camp, then why don't we learn about how Americans also suffered in the Pacific War? So it's very mind-boggling that we don't learn about that. And I'm not trying to compare atrocities. I'm just saying that
Right.
if we learn about something else, we should learn about something else that also relate to that relate to us.
Right.
Yeah, and the story is actually very interesting too, because B-29, they were bombing Japan, and one of the plane got shot down, and a few of the pilots died right away. And then a few other were captured by these Japanese villagers, and there were only one guy who was then sent to like a POW camp, but then there were 4 or 5 other guys who were captured by these villagers, and then they were shipped to a hospital. And you can tell by these nurses' testimonies, like there was this one nurse who was just basically like, you can tell that they were probably thinking that they're going to get helped because they were being shipped to like a college hospital setting.
Mhm.
But little did they realize that they were going to be human experimented on. They took out like one guy's like lungs to see how long he can last without his lungs.
Oh my goodness.
And they were pumping like seawater and trying to replace that with saline, to see if that would work. And they were doing all kinds of human experimentations. And that's when and that's like from one, and that was a college campus where they were doing that in front of students.
Wow.
And that's from the Kyushu Imperial University at the time. And that's when I realized that it's probably not just Unit 731 that was happening. It's all over Japan, like all these Japanese campuses, all these Japanese scientists were all doing human experimentations, and not just Unit 731, because they were also doing it in Japanese mainland, where where they captured American like pilots.
That's crazy. I I hadn't heard any of that, so that really is very interesting. So Brandon had asked a question that said, "Did Hitler make any visits to Japan to learn how to make bunkers or to get information there?" And then he asked, "How many trips did he make?" Do you know
I
anything about that?
I haven't looked into that, but it was very interesting because Konoe, Prince Konoe, who was a prime minister for Japan like 3 times, was actually a fan of Hitler, and to the point that he was even dressed up as Hitler during Halloween. And
Oh my goodness.
and right after the war, he committed suicide, so no one really his involvement with Hitler and whatnot.
Mm,
And but today, Germany had atoned and apologized about what they had done in during the war. And a lot of these Unit 731 scientists, Unit 731 was like a biological lab where they were
mm,
doing human experimentation
right,
in occupied China by Japan. And a lot of the Unit 731 scientists were uh never faced justice. And in Auschwitz, for example, they a lot of the scientists faced justice in the
right,
Nuremberg trial, and people
mhm,
know what Auschwitz was.
right.
And so yeah. Oh wow, Brandon. She was wrong on an account. Have her give resources that she gathered her quotes. Yes. I will definitely give resources that I said about.
Well, I mean,
Um,
I think you have a lot of resources since you did a lot of investigation at the National Archives. I mean, there's so much, and then you've heard some personal accounts too. Like you said, you've interviewed some people that have actually given you some information that isn't necessarily in any document that's printed. It's more of their own recounting of what happened,
yes.
during their time.
Yes, and I want to know which thing that Brendan Light 8404 thinks is wrong, and so then we can do further research on it. And so Unit 731 was started by Ishishiro, and it was very fascinating because he really liked he read the Geneva Convention and thought, well, if people are writing rules about germs, then we must harness germs. And he was a biologist, and so he realized that it during Russo-Japanese War, a lot of Japanese soldiers were dying from not having clean water. And so he
Mhm.
developed a water filter, and he peed in it, and then he showed it to the emperor. And then the emperor granted him some funding to start his lab. And so at first he started it in Japan, and then he thought this was way too out there to do it in like the capital in Tokyo. And so when Japan captured Manchuria and turned it into Manchukuo, he was very interested in starting a lab there. So he had a road trip um, with his friends to in Manchuria, and thought, wow, this is a perfect place because it's so remote. So at first he took over a factory, and he was doing human experimentations there, but he got caught
Mm,
because prisoners got out. And so he said, well, let's do it somewhere even more remote. So he took over a village, and then he put his brother as a guard. So then it's more secret. He can trust his own sibling.
right, yeah.
And he was doing all kinds of experimentations there. For example, he was doing frostbite experimentation to see how. So he would have his prisoner out, in because Manchuria was very cold, and so he would have his prisoner out and tie it to like a stake, and then to see how the cold would affect the limbs. And then the scientists would like cut it out to see what happens. And then there was a study, and that's how they realized how to cure frostbites. There were also experimentations on like pressure for aviation in terms of planes, how to develop planes, how much pressure human bodies can take. So
The
these are like
forces,
useful. What?
the G forces of
Yes.
the plane. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are like useful experimentations, I would say. And it got to the point that and then one of his guy developed powder anthrax.
Oh,
So then they were also developing like these balloons that they were going to drop in the United States. In fact, there was a recently we did find documents that they did drop them in New Mexico. And the reason why they were dropping it on New Mexico is that they realized that America was already trying to make atomic bomb. So they were dropping them on New Mexico to basically try to stop the progress on the atomic bomb. Um, and what's also interesting is that these balloons had like these ceramic bombs, and the ceramic bombs had like fleas with biological weapons in it. So like the plague.
oh
And
wow.
yeah, there were a few actually that were dropped in Canada as well. And I also found some documents on it. And so it's just like this very dark chapter of human history.
Yeah. Wow. I had no idea. So what, I mean, I didn't hear about New Mexico. So what was said here about that? Did they put it on any news, or did it impact a lot of people? I mean, where did they drop them in New Mexico,
So
or
they
do you
dropped
know?
them near the site where they were doing where they were developing
The atomic bomb.
atomic bombs. And then
Mhm.
one of the workers submitted a report saying that I must have seen 20 balloons above me while I took off from work. And then it was classified for the longest time.
Oh wow.
And so it was just released. And the archivist was actually very helpful in terms of like trying to get that information out. And I reached out also to Jeff K, who also found the same thing. So I'm pretty sure I'm not making it up. Jeff K is also very an enthusiast, I would say, on trying to research into Unit 731 and whatnot. And yeah, so we all know about Auschwitz, and like we all know about all these human experimentations by Joseph Mengele,
Mhm.
but we like people don't know who Ishishiro is. Like I would say today, a typical American would know who Ishishiro is, and so that's why I think it's really interesting um to look into like that large scale of
Yeah.
like biological weapons that was done. Um, and yeah,
Wow. So are you writing a book, or have you written a book about some of this stuff that
yes,
you
I
come
have written
across?
multiple books about Unit 731.
Mm.
In there you can find also like uh the bomb. I attached one of the bomb pictures in one of my book from the National Archives because it was very interesting. At first um they were making these biological bombs from steel and from metal.
Mhm.
And then later they realized that that's not effective because as they drop it from air, the steel is going to stop the germs from getting out. And
Wow.
so then that's why they made it out of ceramic. So then when they drop it, it breaks, and
Right.
then it the germs can get out more easily.
Wow. So some of those experiments, like you said, I guess it's good information, but man, the people that suffered, that went through it to have that experiment figure out frostbite or something like that, or the G forces, having that person having had to go through that, I just can't imagine the
I can't.
horrors of that.
Yeah, I can't imagine dying that way. Period. Like I think I can like vivisection, which is when they cut you out without any anesthesia. That because they wanted to not slow down germs. And that to me is so insane. It's just an insane concept that was even a thing in World War II. And that's not something that we talk about. For me, it's quite difficult to like comprehend, and like to die
Mhm.
in a like, for example, what I was talking about in terms of Kyushu Imperial University, where these guys were cut up and in front of college campus. Not only did they die like that, it's like they die like that in front of like a lecture. And so and I think it's also like money really leads to like this greed, and because of how much Ishishiro was making and how much funding he got from Hirohito, the emperor, that all the other scientists wanted to be like him. So it was not just
Mhm.
Unit 731. There were all kinds of scientists who were trying to do human experimentation just to be like Ishishiro. And I was reading the Yokohama trial where they were one of this Japanese scientist doctor was working at a POW camp, and he started injecting soy milk into people's veins because he thought that that will give them protein quicker. But people actually like drink protein and then it becomes amino acid and whatnot, and then and that's how you absorb protein. But then because he was reading about the work that Ishishiro was doing, and he was so eager to do human experimentation that he was shooting like soy milk into people's veins, which was just like, it's like some torture that I would never think of.
Right.
And so I think there was all that, like, you know, inspiration because Ishishiro made it in a sense. And I also think that there were more camps than just Unit 731, just by like, we recently on our YouTube channel, Pacific Front Untold, we actually interview the son of the scientist at Unit 1644, and he was talking about how his father was actually working in a biological weapons lab in maybe Nanjing, and he discovered a bunch of paperwork from his father, and people just assume that he's like an expert on the subject, but he went to the archives in Japan and only found like the list of names of the scientists working at this like lab. He doesn't really know what was worked on in this lab, and he said that there needs to be more research. And I think it's very interesting because it's been like 80 years since World War II, and this is some of the stuff that we're finding is like it's still new items
Yeah.
because and no one has heard about, just because that it was classified for so long. And a lot of the classified documents were, I don't know if you know about this, but like Civil War papers were still made out of cotton,
Mhm.
but World War II was gotten to the point that it was so resource poor that it was made out of like onion skin paper and like, or like whatever they could find, and they can just compound it together. So a
Mhm.
lot of this paper, it's like already, so it's already crumbling if they're not digitized,
Oh, wow.
because it's so fragile. And so I mean, I'm like, So I remember there was this one box. I opened it and it was just all crumbled. And then there was another box that I opened it. I'm like, okay, if I touch it with like my hands, my skin oil might just like not make this box possible.
Right.
So I like use gloves and like and not trying to not get like any light on this paper because it was so fragile. And so that I feel like whenever I'm scanning these documents, I feel like I'm racing against time.
Yeah, I mean, definitely if the history of those documents is lost because, they're beyond repair or, or beyond reading, I mean, whatever they contain is going to be lost to history, and we're just not going to know what it was unless there's some other record somewhere, and who knows where that might be.
Right.
So but I can't imagine they just let you touch those old documents. They just let you go through them in the archive. They
Yeah.
don't. Is there somebody that like manages it while you're looking at it, or they just let you?
One time they were like, "Oh, this is getting this box of paper looks so fragile. We might need our conservation team to take a look at it really quick."
Mhm.
And so they were doing that.
Um,
And
wow.
so then they told me to stop scanning. They were like, "Oh, we need to go back and go to the back and see if we can like fix it." Um so there's that. And sometimes the conservation team will come down with like a set of plastic folders and just put my papers into the plastic folders, so then like maybe it'll survive another, couple of years. But yeah,
Mhm.
that's the kind of like status that these documents are in, because yeah, of just the lack of resources during World War II.
Right, we're just racing against time to keep them, whatever they contain, part of history. So, how can somebody help your research or help you and your organization with what you're doing? What do you need from people to continue your work?
We have an internship program, so if they can apply, and then we can like, a lot of our online exhibitions were built out of like interns from the past, because they need college credit and we provide that sometimes. And then they piece a lot of our research together on our digital archives. And also, if they can donate, that'd be great. So then it would allow us to pay for hosting for our archive and whatnot, and also allow us to scan more pages from the National Archives and put it on our website. And yeah, reach out and volunteer. We have a contact form on our website. So yeah.
So, when is your podcast? What days or what times? When can someone check that out? And you usually just have episodes saved somewhere too, where someone could preview or review something you've already done.
Yes, it's on YouTube. It's Pacific Front Untold.
Pacific Front Untold. Is it live or is it all just recorded?
It's recorded.
Okay. All right. So James Bradley, he hosts all of them for you, or he just hosts some? Because I know I watched one with him talking about how the Rockefellers and the Bushes, and he was talking about the history in America about financial, I guess financial or big families that had some sway, and then he was talking about the Sung family in Japan, and so I was really interested in that. So does he host a lot of those, or is that just
I think he hosts
one-on-one?
about like half of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was talking about the Sun family in China, actually.
Oh, China, I'm sorry.
Yes, it was very interesting because they were the China lobby. And what's interesting is that they got FDR to fund a lot of what Chiang Kai-shek was doing in China. And that was the nationalist government who lost to Mao Zedong. And I think when I was a kid, there was a journalist who wrote about that. And this journalist lived in Daly City and he was killed
Mhm.
by some mafia that was related to the Sung family. And so if for James Bradley to talk about it so openly, I think it's very fascinating.
So Brandon says that Civil War was hemp. After that, any U.S. wars was cotton blend. I didn't know. Good to know. So what did your grandmother think when was she around when to know that you were doing all this research and finding out all this information? What did she think about it?
Unfortunately, not. I was only inspired by like her stories. Actually, after she died, we actually found a box of like military yen and also um rice rationing coupons in like under her bed. And what had happened was that her family was forced to trade in a lot of what they had into like military yen, and afterward the inflation had caused this military yen to become useless. And so, but I guess she just kept a big box of it, maybe thinking that one day it will become of use.
Right.
And so then that made her stories more real to me. Because like I saw physical evidence, and I think that's why I need to like go to the National Archives to see like these physical documents, because for me that's like proof of what had happened.
Right.
Yeah. Did your family serve in World War II?
I didn't have anybody that I know of in my family serve in World War II. I've served, but I had family in Vietnam, but not in World War II that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently read James Bradley's like latest book on Vietnam, and I thought it was very interesting too, because it's just like details that you wouldn't know about. Yeah.
Brandon said, "Why not take pictures of the pages?"
I did, and they're all on our digital archives, and I can actually send the link now. And that's what I mean when we digitize a lot of these items. So here, and that's what I mean by like digitizing. We take pictures, we take them into PDF, and then we turn them into into pages. And can you put it into it says connect your YouTube account to join the live chat, but maybe I can just send it to you on private chat.
Sure.
So yeah.
Let me see. Got it.
Which section? Okay. There you go. Thank you so much.
Yep, I got it. So is there anything that I haven't asked that you want to let us know about, or anything that you want to tell us about your research, or anything? Because we have about 8 minutes left, and I just want to make sure that whatever you wanted to talk about tonight, that you had that opportunity.
Oh, yes. Let me type out my YouTube account, and maybe you can share that on your show note if that's possible.
Yeah,
and thank you so much for actually having me today on
Yeah.
your show. And I just followed you guys on Instagram, so maybe yeah.
Yes, no
And
problem. I appreciate
yeah,
it.
and I think the point of our organization is to tell these untold stories that really haven't been told really in in conventional history classes.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard any of this at all. I mean, it's news to me for sure. And not that like I said before, not that I know history very well, and that's my fault. I should have dig deeper into that, because I am interested in it, but I just don't spend the time needed to really dig into the details. But hearing some of these stories, I just can't imagine being someone in that era having to go through some of this. I mean, war is bad, no matter what side of the war you're on, it's bad. But then having this on top of it, having, these experiments and these tortures and these things go on, it's so devastating for families to hear and to know about some of this stuff, and maybe that's why they didn't want them to know, but I'd rather know than not know. I'd rather, understand what happened and just, kind of put the pieces together instead of just, a bunch of blanks.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because my husband's grandmother's cousin was on the United States side doing island hopping campaign, and um and she died in the island hopping campaign, and they got a Purple Heart, but his body was never recovered. I forgot which island. I think it was the Marshall Island, and his body was never recovered. And they were always like wondering what had really happened to him. And recently I met this guy who apparently there is now a service where the remaining family can swap their DNA, and then they can turn it in, and then they would go to check out like some mass graves in like, for example, Guadalcanal, because that was a very brutal campaign, and find the body that match the remaining family,
Oh, wow.
and would send them back, and then so then they can have a proper burial. So yeah, let me know if any of your listeners, I can connect them to George Vitale, who was telling me about this service.
Yeah, I'm sure there may be some that would like that for sure.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that, I mean, now that with the advance in technology, that service is definitely really, really valuable, I think, because not only that gives family a closure.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, George, his grandpa, served in Guadalcanal, and that was like very brutal. I think U.S. Marines had to like replace um the machine guns, like they were replacing people behind the machine guns just because of how brutal it was. And so a lot of his grandpa's like friends died on that island, and then they recently, it was just only in the last 10 years that they started swapping like the DNA, and to see like to recover bodies from that campaign. And I think he just also reached out about this documentary that he was doing. He also volunteers on the USS Hornet out of Alameda Bay, which is pretty close to where we are. So yeah, it's very, I think in the sense, World War II was 80 years ago, but we're still finding like material, so it feels like it just happened like not too long ago.
Right. I mean, it seems all relative today, based on finding facts and just kind of understanding, what really took place, and it brings all the pieces together. And then hopefully, like you said, we don't repeat the past, and the atrocities of the past. And we were looking to a more bright future universally, I hope, instead of some of the things that have gone on in the past. I hope that we see this and think twice, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm also very happy that we did a lot of the oral history before a lot of the fighters actually like perished. Because in Central Coast there was a community of Filipinas who actually fought the Japanese, and the book name is Panay Guerrilla Fighters. And yeah, I think it should be an interesting read for any of your audience member who would want to read about the untold stories of the Philippines during World War II.
Yeah, no, that would be definitely good information as well. So I encourage everybody to go to the website. It's down there going across the screen, pacificatrocities.org, and look at some of the books and documentaries and things that are on that platform, and really hear and understand, some of the other side of the war we haven't heard for World War II, and really educate yourself. I know I will. So I really appreciate having you on tonight, Jenny. It's been so interesting hearing more of your work and how you're really tying, all of connecting all the dots, basically, as they say, for both sides of the war, the Japanese and then the other islands that Japan invaded, and then the American side. It's definitely helpful to hear all that and to know it, because I think it's important that we do. I think, like you said, it really gives families closure to understand what really happened in the war, and hopefully we don't end up doing similar.
Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you. And this is Tracer Round signing off.
Life is like a duck. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. Here at Military Broadcast Radio, we're teaming up with our friends at Die Tired, the veteran-friendly music band spreading strength, resilience, and mental health awareness one shirt at a time.
And check this out. Their brand new shirts feature broadcast beaker right on the breast pocket. A reminder that you can weather the storm, and you're never alone.
Shirts are only $25, and proceeds support giving veterans a voice. MBR's mission to teach veterans how to podcast and videocast. Because when our vets are talking, they're not overthinking. They're not second-guessing. Together, we stop the 22 stigma. Grab your shirt today at mbradio.us and hit the shop. Or go directly to toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband. That's toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband.
Suit up, stand strong.
Remember, we're unduckable together.
You're built tougher than the storm.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.